applications. And she is very active in the software craftsmanship community. And she has been a member of the Oracle Groundbreaker Ambassador Program since 2009, a recognition given to a very select few people. Sandra, thanks for taking the time out to join us and to do this great webinar. Over to you.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Yes, welcome to the session Testing Tools in Java. Yeah, I don't think so that I have to give some information about me. Yeah, you can find me on many social media, so Twitter, Mastodon. In Germany, I have so many articles in magazine, but in my main time, I'm helping software development teams to develop Java enterprises applications, and I help the teams to automate the development process. I give some trainings, workshops, so there are so many topics I cover. So let's talk about motivation about this talk. Every software Java developer knows test frameworks like JUnit, but in my consulting job, I always have these questions or the statements. Yeah, it's a very cool tool, but this kind of software we cannot test locally. We need a big integration test on production or on test system, so I cannot write the development test on that. Or yes, Sandra, automating tests is very cool, but it's too much time consuming, so let's do it manually. I can do it. Or sometimes you say, hey, this piece of software code I cannot test, it's so difficult. Okay, you can discuss why I cannot test it, because manually you always can it. And I say, okay, let's take it as a challenge to go to these problems and find out how I can solve this with test toolings. So the agenda for this webinar, for the session, is that we have some, we go through some problems that I find in my consulting job, and I will introduce you to the problem, what the problem is, and I'll give you, I will not say solution, the motivation, how to solve it. Maybe it's okay for your problem, but maybe it's only idea for you, how in which direction you have to go to find a solution for your project. So let's start with the first problem. I often say, yeah, we can write tests, but this test can only run under certain conditions. And the conditions can say, could be like, okay, this is a code that only runs on Linux or on Windows. And then the common way is, okay, I run this test locally because I have a Windows, then I have to uncomment this test and check in because my CI run on Linux system, vice versa. So in JUnit 5, you have the possibilities to describe tests on conditional test execution. So you have annotation like enabled on OS. So you can say, hey, this is a test that only runs on Linux, or on Windows it's the same. Or you can say, yes, this test is good, but on the Linux system, you should disable it. So you can use the annotation disable it. The same is not only for operation system, the same is on Java versions. Maybe you have some kind that's specific for Java 8 or Java 10. So you can say enable it or disable it for on specific Java 1 environment. So you have a specific annotations for this condition. The next one is that sometimes you need condition, they are based on system properties. So Java JUnit 5 have annotations. They say, hey, I want to enable the test when specific system properties are set. So I can have a regular expression to match it, or I can have say, okay, they need a specific value from that, then I can run it or not. So you have many possibilities to define a condition. So you have you don't need to uncomment or comment test there's a specific run. So the annotation, the framework helps you when to run specific tests on specific conditions. The same as I like environment variables. So when you don't have system properties, you, for example, you have environment variables. Okay, the same way, you have a specific annotation that you can use it. The next one is test code duplication. Let's have a sample. Here's a class that describes positions. It's a piece of code from the coding cutter mouse robot, where you have a little robot on the mouse, then that you have to program his movement on the mouse. And you have position class who is, okay, say move backward or move forward. You give a direction and the method gives you a new position of this robot. So the naive approach is that you have copy and paste tests, that you have say, okay, move backward, but to north. You have position on the test, you calculate a new position, you assert this position and so on. And when you look at this test, the test looks very the same. The only difference is the input parameters and output parameters that you have to test. So the question is how I can improve this test on that side. In JUnit 4, you have the parameters tests. This was a little bit complicated because you need a runoff, this run with, then you need per method own classes. So you have many test classes for one production class. And yeah, like me, I have to copy and paste from other tests because I always forget how to write this parameters test in JUnit 4. And therefore, sometimes it would be easier to copy paste the method and forget about the parameters. And when you look at JUnit 5, it's easier because you have the possibilities to write many parameters tests in one test class. So you parameters your test method with parameter test. You define where the method source comes, so you can create a method that generated the test data. So you can have one test for one specific method, and you can define over the method parameters the input and output parameters. So it was very, I think, very easy to write a parameter test in JUnit 5. When you have specific kinds to define data, so you have many possibilities in JUnit 5. So you have to say, okay, maybe I don't need a method for generating the data. Maybe I have a constant, so I can use a value source. When I have an enum that should be used, so I can say, hey, here's the enum source. This is the enum classes, and JUnit 5 is your generating the data. Maybe you have a CSV source, maybe as a file, or you like the structure. You can use CSV source or CSV file source for that, or you need some little more complicated thing that you can use the annotation argument source to use a specific class that is responsible for the test data generation. When this looks not very smart for you, you can use other test framework like Spock, because Spock is based on the programming language Ruby, and because of the Ruby programming language, you have the possibilities to describe your test data in a table format. So you can write your test. It's very that you can say, okay, I have my test code, position on a test, a new position. I have my assertion about expect. And then I have a where part where I can define in a table form where my test data are. In this one, my direction and my expected position. And maybe it's for you easier to understand the test when you have a table format for it. So you have many possibilities to write parameters tests in Java. Okay, you can say, I am talking about Ruby, but yeah, Ruby looks very similar to Java, so I would say it's a test tool for Java. The next problem I have is to generate test data. They are web-cited, they can say generate data. Why is the problem? Maybe you need some data like name, address, date, time, and when you have an international software, the format for date and for address are different in many countries. So maybe you can find it by yourself, but maybe you need many data. So you can go to generatedata.com to generate some kind of set of data in a specific form. They are like names, companies, dates, address, numeric data, texts, mathematics, and so on. And then you have a format like JSON or HTML or Excel, where you can generate a data from. The problem is that you have to import this file in your test code. So you need to write some code how to read or to interpret this data. The next one is the question is very good for what to say. And what if you prefer code? So can I generate test data when I have only the programming language Java? And there's a possibility with the tool, the library DataFaker. It's based on the idea from the Ruby world. They have a faker too. So I can say, hey, I need a person data like name, job, first name, last name. And then I can say, hey, please generate me name, give me a first name, please DataFaker, generate me job title. So I can go through Java DSL and generate the data for that. They have many built-in fakers, like for business, for commerce, for long texts. They have local supports. So when you need English variant for that, use the local support for English for your Indian, or when you're in Germany, you can use the German one. So the next problem is that how to structure this test data, because there are many boilerplate code. So when you always have the person that need the first name, last name, so can you use to structure your test data like with the ObjectMother pattern. So you can go say, okay, you have a person test data class, they have static method, and I can generate with the method new person without job title every time a person without job title. So I can have one position in my code where I have the logic for this kind of test data. So when I need some changes, I can go to this position and make some changes. And so I reduce this boilerplate code to create a new person. The next one is that maybe, okay, I need always a new person, but it could be that I have to change the title because of some edge cases in my test. So I can use the TestDataBuilder pattern, you know, it from the common builder pattern. So I can write a class that is the builder. So I can have the possibilities like with the Java DSL to build a person object with the builder. I can combine these two patterns. So maybe if I say, okay, I have an ObjectMother pattern that gives me a default person and combine with the builder so that I can make some changes when I need it on that side. The next problem that we have is that we have poorly readable assertions. So when you go have a look on the assertion what JUnit give me, there are some like assert equals or assert true. The problem is that, yeah, you have very copy and paste, and it's not very readable what I'm doing here. Fortunately, we have some libraries like AssertJ. They give me a Fluent assertion API where I can write assertion in a Fluent way. So the IDE my editor can help me to find out which kind of assertion I can use it. So maybe I have an object like here, hero, and I can test if some properties are set, or I have a string, so I can test many assertions in a row, so I don't need to create boilerplate code to test it on one object. In this way, I have the string, a lot of rings, and I can test many aspects like is not null, start with, contains, and with, and so on. For me, the main argument for AssertJ is the list assertions. So I can give this AssertJ my list with some objects, and I have a Fluent API where I can test many constraints on it. So I don't need to write boilerplate code to test if how the size of my list is, and then go there and unpack my list to go inside of the list. So I can say, hey, test please which size the list has, test please which values are in this list. I can say if I need exactly, one of them should be there. So I have many possibilities what I can test with my list. The next thing is maybe I don't have a list of string, that's very easy list, but maybe a list of specific objects, and I want to give inside this object and find out if the properties are correct to set. So I can say, okay, AssertJet my list, and I can say, please extracting a specific property, in this case rename, and please have a look if their real name contains specific values, in this case Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent. So I don't need to write boilerplate code that extract my object of this list, so I can go directly inside. The next one, what is very cool in AssertJ, is that I can define exception assertions. So if I have code that's true exception, I can say, hey, catch this robot, and please test if the exception is an instance of a specific exception. And I can test the message of this exception. So so I can go deeper inside without boilerplate code to find out if the right exception and the right message exception is throwing. So, and the next point is that I have many styles how to write it. In the above example, we have the BD style, so what is given and then style. And in the next example, we have the style that I say, okay, as it's drawn by, so I have a lambda where my exception is drawn, and I can go with my Fluent API, test if there is a specific exception, is the message containing, and so on. And the next thing is that for a specific exception, I can have specific syntax, like for null point exception. So I can write AssertJet null point exception. And so this is another style how to write my code down to test if the exception is throwing or not. In some cases, it may be important to test explicit that are not exception is thrown. So I can say AssertJet code and then say does not throw any exception, to make clear that's very important that in this this code no exception should throw. The next topic, what I think is important, is to speak about assumptions. You will say, okay, assumptions that's not so very important. I can use assertions. That's true, but when you have test reports, then it's very good that we divide these two parts, because for me as a reader of a test report, it's important information if the test is not running because the assumption is not matched, or my test is failing because my code is wrong. So when I use for assertions, it's look like in the test reports, okay, there's some problem with my production code is not, the assumption was not matched, that's my test is not really running. So for me, it's important for reading the test reports to make to have a definition about assumptions and assertions. And we have the luck that AssertJ matched this problem. So we have assume that, and assume that RP, it looks like the assert that RP, but my test reports, my test framework for the test reports can say, here is an assumption failing, so I have to make a different output in my test report on that. So so I can have more clear test reports. So that helped me to find out where to search for the reason why this test was not running. The next problem what we have with assertion is that when you look at the standard assertions, you know maybe the rule one assert for one case. That's true, but for me this pattern is important to say, okay, yeah, I have one use case, but maybe I need more assertions to assert the whole use cases. So I can write down like assert equals, many assert equals and assert true, but this is match one use case. And the problem is when the first one fails, then the second and the third one is not running. So I have this pattern like, okay, fix the first one, run the test again, fix the second one, run the test again, and hopefully the third one was okay. And with JUnit 5, we have the feature group assertion. That means I can say assert all and put in lambdas all my assertions. And JUnit 5 is running all assertions and report only the failed one. So I can see, oh, the second one was failed, but the third one was okay. So I have only to make a fix for the second one, and everything is fine. So I reduce the loop, how many times I have to run my test to fix all my assertion failing. So maybe this is a good point to make Exkurs, because many of you have maybe JUnit 4 in your project, and many people ask me, yeah, it's very cool what you have shown with the feature of JUnit 5, but we cannot use it because we are on JUnit 4. And a good thing, the migration to JUnit 5 is very easy. So you have only to replace your dependencies from JUnit 4 to JUnit 5. That's the JUnit Jupyter. And you have to add the so-called JUnit Vinted engine that is responsible for running JUnit 5 tests in JUnit 4 test framework. So you can say, okay, I will not replace my JUnit 4 test, but I can start to write JUnit 5 tests. So this is a possibility. Maybe you want to refactor your test and you have a very big test code base. So to make the migration is very time consuming. So maybe you can automate it. And with Open Rewrite, we have a tooling that make automated source code refactoring. So for JUnit 5 to JUnit 4, I can put the Rewrite Maven plugin to temporary to my POM. Of course, it's possibility with Gradle or other build toolings, and then give in a so-called receipt to say, hey, please make a migration from JUnit 4 to 5. And in this case, I have a Spring Boot application, so they have to match some specific Spring Boot JUnit 4 feature that it's running. So I run with Maven Rewrite 1, and you can see here that the original receipt is based on other receipts. So we have we go to many receipts to match this problem. And after that, we have a diff. So a tooling replaced my dependencies. He replaced my imports. He replaced my Spring Runner to my new annotation Spring Boot test. And so I can, with one command line, can I migrate my whole code base. This is very cool when you follow the standard pattern of JUnit 4. Maybe you have some specific project specific. Of course, you have to do it manually, or you have the possibility to write open rewrite receipts that match your problem. But then you have the one script that migrate your whole code base on that side. So maybe let's look at another problem. So sometimes we have the problem like two objects are equal, but they should not be equal. This is very important when you have a store object in hash sets or in caches. So that maybe could be an issue for you. So let's see this in Pojo. We have a person class. They have a first name, last name, and job title. And we have to, first of all, we have to override the equals in the hash code method. And the question is if we do it right. And the problem is that when the first time you write this class, that's very easy. You can say, hey, editor, please generate the equals in hash code method. It's very easy. But when you add a new property, then sometimes you forget it to make a new generating of the equals in hash code. Of course, some of you can say, yeah, therefore I have Lombok, and you can use Lombok for that, so you don't have the problem. But I have the problem is when you're using other libraries like MapStruct that make also some reflection and bytecoding magic, then sometimes you had other problems. So this is the reason why I'm not a big fan of Lombok. I like to generate it, but on the other side, I have to have in mind that when I put in new properties in my class, I have to change my equals and hash code method. So as a reminder, what's the important one? I have, when you look on the Java doc, on the object equals and hash code, there are some contracts. So every equals method needs follow some rules, like so be reflexive, symmetric, transitive, and consistent. And the same with the hash code method. When the hash code method should return the same integer, when the equals method produce the same result, but on the other side, a hash code could be different, or must not be, could not be. It's not always the same. Like when the equals is not the same, the hash code could be the same. So there are some rules that you follow. So the question is how to test it. You can do it very naive. Like to say, okay, I have two objects with a different property set, and I can say it's not equal, and that's okay. But you will create very boilerplate code, and so there are tooling like Equals Verifier, where you can say, hey, please equal verifier, please test the fields for this class, and verify if I follow the equals and the hash code contract. So if I don't follow the contract, Equals Verifier would be produce an output and say, hey, you have to do something. They are not completely. The Equals Verifier has other features like you can test it if the classes are written that they are immutable. So he tested if my properties have a final. In this case, I say I don't have a final, so he produces an error. But when you see in the previous slide, I can say, okay, non-final fields are not very important for me, so please suppress it. So, so only test the hash code and the equals method, and then it's fine for me. The next question is, okay, when I have so many tests with equals and hash code, what's about the toString method? And many of us use toString for logging. So, and the same problem like above, that when I put a new field in my class, then I have to change my toString method too. And again, of course, I can use Lombok, but there are some cases I don't want to use Lombok on that side. So again, I can generate the toString with my editor or something like that, but I need some, when it's important for me, I need some tests that verify if I really do it and do it in the same time. So I can say, hey, with the toString verifier, here's my class person. Please use a specific name style and verify if that everything is all right. And if something is wrong, I can fail verification during my test run, and I can look at that. What's the problem? And toString verifier have many name style. Therefore, for the Eclipse one, IntelliJ one, maybe I use the Guava string builder or the Apache string builder. I can use it, and I can make them more verifying. Like I want to produce some hash code. Maybe some fields should be ignored because they are password or something like that. What's about null fields and so on? So I have many possibilities. The important thing on that side is don't do it cold because I show you the tools, and yeah, I know I have to do equals verifying and toString verifying. Now it's a tool that's important in your project because you use toString for logging, or you need that the hash code and the equals method are implemented correctly because you have caching or use the hash. Then there are tools that ensure that you're on the right track on that side. The next problem that we will have is concurrency. So sometimes the people say to me, yeah, testing is very cool, but I can do it because, yeah, there's concurrency. I don't know how to test when I have concurrency in my production code. And fortunately, we have a tooling. It's called Await-Utility, and that's a Java DSL that helped me synchronize asynchronous operation. Problem that your production code is safely. That's your job. It only helps to synchronize in your test, but it not ensure that your production code is trace safety. That's you have to do it by yourself. That's not the task of this tooling. It's a test tooling, so if you don't like Java or you use Ruby or Kotlin or Scala, don't worry, Await-Utility has a support for that as DSL that's specific for Java, Ruby or Kotlin or Scala. So you have many possibilities to write a test on the side. So how I can write a test? Let's look on a sample. Now I have a class concurrency demo. Item. And, I want to test if this object have this new item hello world, but I have to wait till the concurrency is running good. So I have the possibility to say, hey, method that I call. So on the third line, the test is stopping and waiting till this condition is matched, and then the assertion is on that. To make a test if everything is going right. So I have more possibilities on that. So I can say I can create fields. So I can say, okay, wait until a specific object has a field with a specific value. I can say, for example, when I have networking, okay, ignore exceptions, and when no exception is throwing, I can go ahead. Or I can say I have to wait for minimum time till I ask for specific value. So Await-Utility give me many possibilities to describe how long I have to wait till I can go ahead with my test on that side. The next problem is integrated tests, and here we have to go a little bit databases, email, web services, or REST calls. So you have how to test this edge cases when a database when I have a database, or when I have to send or receive emails, or have a REST calls outside of my application. And you can ask you, okay, what's the problem from the side? The problem is that we have interaction with infrastructure, and in many product or in many product, I see that it was okay, interaction with infrastructure remote server. So I gave feedback very late when I have some errors. So then I switched my context. I was no problem, and I lost many times when I switching in context to find out the errors on it. Another problem was, so maybe I cannot make a Maven build or a Gradle build because I need a specific network connection. Then fails because the infrastructure was not there, so I have a false negative error code very high. Maybe I have my database on my machine, but the setup was very complicated, so I need some time to find out if my specific structure was right, and maybe the test execution was very slow. And explain what's the difference between integration and integrated test. So integration tests are great. So I can test with the real infrastructure, but we have integrated tests that looks very similar to integration did, but they have some pitfalls. Like when I have a test that will pass or fail based on correctness of other systems, so I have integrated tests, and this kind of integration test I don't want. So when I can find when I have integrated tests, it's like okay, when I have a setup, spin up other service on my local testing environment, that's a test. When I need a specific connection to another system, or my test fails because my application. So let's look at the requirements. So I want that my builds run independently from another system. Then I have not coupling to other developers. I want to have feedback in case of errors on my machine and not on the remote machine. And it should be speed up my test execution on that side. So have a look on three tasks. Maybe I have some REST calls. What about emails? And what about database on the side? The first one is HTTP, what we want to see. And we have a technique how to do it. It's called mocking. So when you know Mockito or something like that, you're using in your test already. So the question is, can I use this technique for HTTP calls? And we have syntax or the RP is a little bit different, but the concept are the same. So I will show you an example with MockServer. You have calls outside your expectation, and where you can verify your requests. So the MockServer is looking like, okay, you has a request matcher. So you write some request matching, and you describe some expectation. So you have the possibilities that you can test error from outside your application. So let's have a look. So I have give me some information about the Star Wars environment, And I have a Starof client where I want to find some all starships. So the question is how to test it. So I have MockServer extensions, JUnit 5. I have a MockServer client, and so I can ask a MockServer client, hey, where's the remote address, the port of my machine where MockServer is started. Very important part, because this is the difference of an integrated test and an integration test. In an integrated test, I will define a port of my machine. The problem is I have to write down, okay, every developer in my company or my project have to ensure that this port is free. And in this case, I say, hey, MockServer, please start on a port that is available. And I will ask you which port you are using. So I can define this in my test. So in every time, maybe I use port 8080 or 81. So and I look which port is available. And then I can write down, like write down like the normal unit test. I say, okay, client, when you get a specific request on a specific HTTP method, please give me a specific response. And then I write my test, find our starship, and make a search and what I want. The problem on the side is that I break an important rule. So my test will always run okay, because yeah, I use mocks. But in the case my the API is changed, I find it. I need tests that runs against the real API, and I will need to find out duels are still correct. So in my daily work, I will use this mocks, but on the night I will run this test again against the real API to find out if the API will change or not. And so I have a compromise between fast feedback and correctness. So can verify if my test tuples are still correct. The next point is that maybe I have my own HTTP endpoint REST points. I want to ensure that my own endpoints I have tests when I apply journey tests or Spring M4C. I have something like mock M4C. But maybe I need something framework independent that can I use with REST Assert. And for me, the main feature of REST Assert is that I have better possibilities to write response, and it gives me a very good structure given bandance time. So let's have a look on that side. So when I have maybe a REST that produce a JSON response, I can write down and say, hey, please call the HTTP method get on the path lotto. And then I get a body and but please go on lotto.lotto ID if there are 5. And when I can write in this dot notation again. Maybe this is familiar for you because REST Assert based on Groovy. So this lotto.winners ID notation that is Groovy notation on the side. The reason is REST Assert is write a wrapper over Groovy to use it for the JSON path. Okay, so you can say why not use Groovy directly? These are very good questions. In many companies, there are some problem when you put a Groovy dependency because it's a new language. You can discuss if this is a good argument or not. And with REST Assert, That's a new language for that. So for me, it's okay that you use that. And you have this good structure to write tests with the given then style. The same is with XML. You can say, hey, please call the HTTP method post on the path read XML. And then you can define, and the body should name. It's not a REST assert specific library. So if you're familiar with Exkurs, it's for you very easy to write this then part in REST assert because you don't need to learn a new thing on that side. And the next point is that you can put this in your Spring tests. So maybe you have a controller class test if the JSON is generated right. So you can write a test. Please use REST assert. Describe how the JSON should look like. You can do it in a plain mock-mvc, and you see here that's not really readable. Or okay, maybe it's readable, but you have to know the annotation or how to notation the JSON part in the Spring kind. So maybe the REST assert part is for you easier on that side. The main point on that side is when of your controller, I recommend to write a plain unit test without this whole controller stuff. So you can use the controller class plain without the HTTP stack and pass, and so you can look if the logic is correct. Only important when you have to test the whole HTTP stack. So if the status code is correct, the JSON is correct, and so on. It should not be a test to the logic. I recommend using a plain unit test for that. Let's have a look on emails. Here again, there are some tooling like Greenmail that helps me. It's a lightweight sandboxes mail server that I can start from my test. And he supports the generic emails protocol like SMTP, POP3, IMAP, and so on. Of course, I can use it outside my JUnit framework, so I can use it with plain Java, can use it standalone as a WAR file or Docker container. So there are many possibilities how to do it. And here again, let's have a sample. I have a mail client, create an email and send, and I want to test if this was correct. And I can say to my Greenmail extensions, hey, I need the SMTP protocol. Please, I have to implement the finding the available TCP port by myself. So I use the socket utils from Spring. And then I can ask my Greenmail extension, hey, after sending my message, please give me the received message, and I can make a assert on the content of this message, or if there's message on that side. So I have to test my email logic with a real email server and coming to the last point, databases, and maybe we should have a look how the problem was solved in the past. I see many project databases like Hatzot, Derby, but cannot testing everything, because maybe you need a specific Oracle feature. Maybe Derby doesn't support it, so you need a big integration test or big end-to-end test to find out if everything was working. Maybe you had a standalone databases, so you was dependent on a specific the setup was not automated, since you have every time sometime was not working on it. To make the test was very time consuming. Some projects or some company have shared databases, so we have a close coupling between developers, and sometimes was like, okay, maybe two teams are working on the same database table and on the same time, and then you on lunchtime you find out, okay, it was not working the whole morning because another developer in another team was working on the same table, and so you will crash every time the tests on both sides. So again, here the high false negative error rate was very high. Fortunately, we have test containers based on Docker containers. That means they write Java API to control Docker container from my test. So now I can, with the help of test containers, I can say, okay, please use the PostgreSQL container with the annotation at container. So with the annotation test containers, I register in my JUnit 5 workflow that please look at the add container. Write my test for my repository, where I can say, hey, Postgres container, please give this a person was correct, and now I know, okay, when it's running in this test, I will know that SQL in production will also run. In this case, I do this a little bit more. I use a database migration tool, Flyway, to configure my database. There are other tooling for that. I can use plain SQL script. This is depend on you. I test my DB migration scripts if they are running, and I don't need to commit and push it and wait for my CI, so I can write a test on my local machine that tests if my script are correct or not. So the round trip time is very low on that side. So now I have then my build, for example, a Maven build. He's running, and I give a feedback. Okay, everything is good, and I can. Okay, when it's running on my machine, it's high that's running on my CI. Of course, you have a new dependency. It's this Docker. So of course you have to install a new tool. That's I know that's not always working on Windows. There's some pitfalls on that side, but on the other side, my opinion is that you should it reduced increase the quality of your tests in this edge case when you have infrastructure in play. So test container databases, they have some special database containers like MySQL, PostgreSQL, Oracle, but they have specific containers for Selenium tests, and so you can make an end-to-end test on your local machine with automated video recording. You can put other specific container like Elasticsearch, Kafka, MockServer, HashiCorp Vault. Of course, you can put any Docker container because they have an API for generic containers. When you have Docker Compose files you want to use, then you can define Docker Compose files and put it in your test. So there are many possibilities how to test your infrastructure on that side. So the good question on this point is, what about my existing DB test? Maybe you have your embedded database and you had to invest many times to write this test, and you have no time to factor your test to test containers. So it's a good question. So test containers has for some databases so-called JDBC URLs. They call so they have the constant JDBC TC, and when the JDBC driver of test containers find this, then he started a Docker container, and then you have the same experience like I showed you before. So in this case, you have changed the URL of your test, and then everything is fine. So, but maybe you have a database that it's not covered with this feature, then another tooling can help you, but you can follow this concept of test containers. In Maven, there are so-called Docker Maven plugin. It's well known for building Docker images. You can also use it for start and stop containers. So when we have a deeper look on the process, there are one phase is called integration test, and many embedded database tests are running in this phase, Maven phase. We have a phase pre-integration test, and after that so-called post-integration test, you can start the Docker Maven plugin to start a container. In the pre-integration test phase, in the post-integration test phase, you can stop that. And the database, and the Docker Maven plugin has the possibility to find out what the Docker container is running, so you can put it via system properties in your integration test. So you have some refactorings. So many like to refactor all your tests to test containers. So could give you a summary of some ideas how to solve some problems with integrated tests. And now I hope we have some time for some questions. If not, you can find me on Twitter, on Mastodon. The slides and sample codes you can find me on GitHub. And
Right. Sandra, I know, thanks a lot for a brilliant session. I think, I personally like the parts where you talked about the database, right? So multiple developers working, and it's a very common enough problem, and it's a very, very high error rate because you have like multiple people using the same schema, same tables. So that was something that was very, very useful to me, and so many other things, right? The code examples and everything. So really, really immersive session, I must say, and I'm very happy to hear that the slide deck is available. So I mean, because for later reference, people could go back and check some of the things that you mentioned. But thanks for doing this really, really great session. And we hope to bring you back for another session sometime soon.
Yeah, it was a pleasure for me too.
Right.
The link and yeah.
Sure. And thanks a lot. Have a good day ahead.
Okay, thank you too.
Yeah.
Have a nice evening, yes.
Yeah, thank you.